When a subway station clerk found a little girl crying and huddled in the bathroom, he froze in shock, realizing she was clutching a newborn baby in her arms. At first he thought she must have run away from the hospital, which was only one train station away, but her young age, the hospital gown, and the baby still didn't add up. It was only when he called the police and a man who claimed to be the girl's father arrived that he realized the true horror of the situation. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. Malcolm Gaines stepped into Crest Hill subway station for his night shift, the cold fluorescent lights spilling across the tiled floor, casting long, sterile shadows. Clock above the ticket booth blinked 10 p.m., signaling the start of another long night. At 45, he had spent years working as a clerk here, yet the night shift never sat right with him. The silence between passing trains was something he could never quite get used to. At times, dense and suffocating. At others, fragile, stretched thin over the possibility of danger lurking just out of sight. His manager had informed him earlier that there would be a significant influx of passengers around 10:15 p.m. due to a music concert ending at Crest Hill Stadium nearby. The station had prepared for this by stationing more subway personnel on the platform and around the station. Malcolm straightened his orange VE test and ensuring his name tag was clearly visible. As he exited the staff room after punching in tonight, instead of his usual post behind the ticket and information booth, he was assigned to safety control work. His job was to ensure the safety and well-being of the incoming rush of passengers. At the assigned platform he took his position on, the platform 1 behind the yellow line, watching as the digital display indicated the 10:15 p.m. train would arrive in 5 minutes. The atmosphere was already changing as concertgoers began to flood the platform. Their excited chatter and energetic demeanor contrasted sharply with the usual quiet of Malcolm's night shifts. As more people arrived, the volume on the platform steadily increased. Malcolm found himself constantly reminding passengers to stay behind the yellow line, his voice growing hurrah. Ash competed with the noise. He answered a barrage of questions about train schedules and routes, all while keeping a watchful eye on the ever-growing crowd. As every seconds ticked by, he noticed platform became increasingly packed, bodies pressed close together in anticipation of the arriving train. 10th station speakers crackled to life announcing the incoming train. Malcolm raised his voice, shouting for everyone to stand back and make way for exiting passengers. He could feel the vibration of the approaching train through the soles of his shoes as the train pulled into the station with the screech of metal on metal. Malcolm noticed with relief that most of the cabins were relatively empty. This would make the boarding process smoother and reduce the risk of accidents. Once again, he called out for everyone to stand back and allow exiting passengers to disembark first. Malcolm took his place by one of the middle cabin doors. Just as they slid open with a hiss, only a few passengers stepped out, their expressions flickering between surprise and mild irritation. At the waiting throng pressing forward, he really registered them as he crouched to assist an elderly woman in a wheelchair, steadying her as she maneuvered over thoughts. When he saw her, a young girl no more than 8 or 9 years old in a pale blue hospital gown carrying something in her arms, she ran out of one of the train cabins, her bare feet slapping against cold platform floor. Malcolm blinked. Sure, he must be mistaken, but no, there she was, quickly disappearing into the sea of people still flooding the platform. Malcolm processed what he had just witnessed. The girl had been alone. No adult had exited the cabin with her. His heart rate quickened, instinct telling him that something was very wrong. Malcolm's first impulse was to chase after her, but the pressing crowd around him made that impossible. He had a job to do and he couldn't abandon his post. The safety of the hundreds of passengers around him had to come first. With one hand still directing the flow of people, Malcolm reached for his radio intercom with the other. The plastic was slick with sweat. As he brought it to his mouth, security, he called out, his voice taut with urgency. Did you spot a young girl in a hospital gown running across platform 1? She appeared to be white blanket possibly wrapped around a baby. There was a moment of static before security's voice crackled through the speaker. Negative, Malcolm. Haven't seen anyone matching that description. Your location? Malcolm quickly explained his position and that he couldn't leave his post with so many people around. He asked security to help search for the girl, emphasizing the unusual nature of the situation. Copy that. The security respond. We'll keep an eye out and let you know if we spot her. As the train doors beeped their warning and began to close, leaving a still Substantial crowd waiting for the next train. Malcolm's mind raced. Where had the girl come from? Where was she going? And most importantly, what was she carrying? The platform remained a hive of activity as Malcolm tried to make sense of what he had just witnessed. The rhythmic rumble of the departing train faded into the distance, replaced by the persistent hum of conversation from their remaining passengers. Malcolm's eyes continuously scanned the crowd, hoping for another glimpse of the girl in the hospital gown, but she had vanished as quickly as she had appeared. He directed passengers and answered queries. Malcolm's mind worked overtime. He recalled that this train had originated from the direction of CRE's Hill General Hospital Station, just one stop before CRE's Hill Station. It was only a few minutes away by rail, which would explain the girl's attire. She must be a patient who had run away, but what was she carrying? The digital display above the platform caught Malcolm's eye. The next train wasn't due for another 20 minutes. He made a split-second decision. He needed to search the platform to make sure the girl wasn't still here, lost and potentially in danger. "Excuse me, pardon me," Malcolm muttered as he made his way through the crowd. The press of bodies was claustrophobic, the air thick with the mingled sense of perfume, sweat, and excitement. His eyes darted from face to face, searching for any sign of the young girl, but there was no flash of pale blue hospital gown, no glimpse of a small figure clutching a white bundle through in. Malcolm's gut grew stronger with each passing moment. He was considering calling 911 or Crest Hill Hospital when a figure caught his attention. A woman, her clothes worn and dirty, was weaving unsteadily through the crowd. The sharp smell of alcohol clung to her like a cloud, causing nearby passengers to wrinkle their noses and step away, despite her inebriated state. Eyes were sharp as they locked onto Malcolm. She raised a trembling hand, pointing by on the stairs that led to the upper level of the station. "You should check the girl's bathroom upstairs," she slurred, swaying slightly on her feet. Malcolm hesitated, his training wearing with his instincts. "Ma'am, I can't just enter the women's restroom, but I can inform the female staff if something needs to be checked or cleaned up." The woman's bloodshot eyes narrowed, a spark of lucidity cutting through the haze. "There's a young girl on the ground in there," she insisted, her voice low and urgent. Malcolm's heart skipped a beat. Could it be the girl he saw earlier? What does she look like? Heprest? Is she wearing a hospital gown? Which restroom upstairs? But the moment of clarity had passed. The woman just shrugged, her gaze already wandering. "Do your job and check for yourself," she mumbled before stumbling away, disappearing into the crowd as quickly as she had appeared. Malcolm stood frozen for a moment, torn between his duty to remain on the platform and the urgent need to investigate. The memory of the girl's frightened face flashed through his mind, making his decision for him. With a last glance at the platform to ensure no immediate crisis was unfolding, Malcolm set off towards the upper level of the subway station. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his breath coming in short gasps as he pushed against the stream of people heading down to the platform. "Sorry, excuse me," coming through, he ignoring the annoyed looks and muttered complaints as he made his way upstairs. When he reached the upper level, paused, orienting himself. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows, making the familiar space seemed suddenly alien. There were 2 restrooms on this floor, each near different exits. Constant flow of people entering and exiting the station created a chaotic dance of movement and noise. Malcolm headed for the closest restroom first. Near the entrance where a steady stream of people were still arriving from the concert. Without thinking, driven by urgency and concern, he pushed open the door to the women's restroom. The reaction was immediate and hostile. A chorus of angry shouts and shocked gasps filled the small space. A long queue of women glared at him, their expressions a mix of outrage and disbelief. "Hey, what are you doing here, pervert?" one woman yelled, her face flushed with anger. Flustered and embarrassed, Malcolm quickly backed out of the restroom, stammering, "Apologies, I'm so sorry, there's been a misunderstanding. I'm looking for a lost child. I'm with subway security," he explained hastily, showing his badge. The women's expressions slightly at the mention of a lost child, but they still watched him warily as he closes the door. Malcolm berated himself for his carelessness and his haste. He had violated protocol and potentially compromised his position, but the thought of the girl alone and possibly in danger, spurred him on. He hurried to the other side of the station, where the second restroom was located near the other exits. Area was quieter, with fewer people around. The sounds of the busy station seemed muffled here, creating an almost eerie atmosphere. Learning from his previous mistake, Malcolm knocked on the restroom door and called out before slowly pushing it open. "Hello, is anyone in here? This is subway security. I'm looking for a lost child." At first, The restroom appeared empty, the row of stalls silent and still, but then he heard its soft, muffled sobs coming from the sink area. Malcolm's shirt began to race as he stepped inside, his footsteps echoing on the tiled floor there. On the counter lay a crumpled white blanket stained with a spreading patch of yellow. Unmistakably, the baby's urine. The sour scent lingered in the air, sharp and raw, but it was the scent beneath the sink that made Malcolm's breath catch. Curled up in the tight space, clutching a newborn to her chest was a young girl. In a hospital gown, her frail frame trembled, her knuckles white against the fabric, as she held the tiny bundle close, wide, terrified eyes. Lackadanto, her chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths for a moment. The world beyond that cramped, dimly lit space faded, time itself suspended between them. Malcolm froze, shocked. By the scene before him, his hand trembled slightly as he reached for his phone, following protocol and dialing 911 before approaching the girl. As he waited for the dispatcher to answer, he couldn't help but wonder what series of events had led this young girl, an infant, to this moment. And what would happen next? As the dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone, Malcolm took a deep breath. 911. What's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional, a stark contrast to the turmoil of emotions swirling within Malcolm. This is Malcolm Gaines, subway clerk at Crest Hill Station, he said, his voice low and urgent to avoid startling the girl. I found a young girl in a hospital gown with a newborn baby in the women's restroom near the east exit toward River Street. I suspect she's from Crest Hill General Hospital. I saw her get off the train that comes from that direction. We need immediate assistance. As Malcolm relayed the details to the dispatcher, his eyes never left the huddled figure beneath. The synced girl stared back at him, her body tense, ready to bolt at any moment. The newborn, in her arms, shifted slightly, the damp fabric of an overflowing diaper pressing against her thin hospital gown. But aside from that small movement, the baby remained mercifully silent, nestled against the girl's chest, the dispatcher assured. Malcolm, they were sending units and would contact the hospital. As he ended the call, Malcolm reached for his radio, his movements slow and deliberate, to avoid frightening the girl further. Security. This is Malcolm Hess spoke into the device, keeping his voice steady. I found the girl in the upstairs women's restroom near the east exit, requesting immediate assistance and the manager's presence as per protocol with the authorities. Alerted, Malcolm turned his full attention to the frightened child before him. He approached slowly, his hands held out in a non-threatening gesture. It's okay, he said softly, crouching down to her level. I'm here to help. The police are on their way. They will be here soon. Can you tell me your name? The girl looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. She clutched the baby closer to her chest as if afraid Malcolm might try to take it away. After a moment's hesitation, she whispered, Lena Brooks. That's a beautiful name, Lena, Malcolm said, offering a gentle smile. How old are you? 9. She replied, her voice barely audible. Over the distant sounds of Thebes Station, Malcolm's heart sank. He had heard of rare cases where girls as young as 8 had started their periods, but the thought of a child this young having a baby was almost too much to bear. Helpished the thought. Aside focusing on the immediate situation, where did you get the baby from, Lena? He asked, careful to keep his tone neutral and non-judgmental. Instead of answering, Lena clutched the infant tighter to her chest. I don't have milk for her, she said, voice breaking, and she's wet. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication and unspoken fears. Malcolm felt a lump rise in his throat. He glanced at the white blanket on the sink counter, observing that there was no blood on it, only the urine stain. At least the baby appeared to be safe beneath the blanket. He noticed a piece of paper. He saw that it was a birth record with deliberate, careful movements. Malcolm reached for it. That paper was slightly damp from the sink, but still legible. Malcolm's eyes scanned the document quickly. The baby's name was listed as Monica Brooks, along with details of her weight, height, and time of birth. He folded the paper gently and tucked it into his vest pocket for safekeeping, intending to give it to Theophilus. When they arrived, he was about to ask Lena more questions when the restroom door swung open with a creak. Margaret Steele, his manager, entered, her face a mask of shock as she took in the scene. Behind her were 2 police officers and a man Malcolm didn't recognize. The atmosphere in the small restroom immediately changed. Lena flinched at the sight of the man shrinking further back against the wall. Malcolm noticed her reaction, and a feeling of unease settled in his stomach. One of the officers stepped forward, his badge glinting under the harsh lights. I'm Officer Johnson, and this is my partner, Officer Chen, he said, gesturing to the woman beside him. Then he indicated the man who had entered with them. This is Martin Brooks, Hecklam's to-be. The girl's father, Martin Brooks, looked relieved. Aishi's eyes fell on Lena, but there was something in his expression that made Malcolm uneasy. A flicker of something gang or fear passed across his face before being replaced by concern. "Oh, thank God, Martin," exclaimed, his voice thick with emotion as he stepped forward, reaching for Lena. "Anthy, baby, what were you thinking, sweetheart? Running off like that, you had me worried. Come on, let's get yo home." Malcolm watched as Martin grabbed Lena's arm, pulling her to her feet. His grip seemed to tight his movements. Lacking the gentleness one would expect from a worried father, the police officers seemed to notice it too as Officer Chen stepped forward, her hand raised slightly. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her tone professional but firm, "we still need to take some statements for our record before you go. It might be better if we do this outside the restroom, and we also need to secure the area first." Martin's face darkened, a flash of defiance crossing his features, before he schooled them back into a mask of concern. "Please, officer," he said, his tone clipped. "This is not a crime scene. This is just a family matter." Malcolm felt a surge of anger at the man's dismissive tone. He pointed toward the sink, where the crumpled white blanket lay off as a blanket in the sink, and the girl looked distressed. "I believe we should at least ask the girl about the situation," he insisted, his voice steady as he emphasized the seriousness of the situation. The officer approached the sink. Inspecting the blanket, he saw that there was no blood and both the baby and the girl appeared healthy and unharmed. Martin turned to the officer, his expression softening slightly. "My daughter was just too excited about the baby and simply ran away from the hospital when she realized she couldn't handle the baby. She hid here and cried. That's all there is to it." The officers exchanged glances. The Officer Johnson turned to Malcolm. "Mr. Gaines, we understand you're worried," he said, his tone plating, "but we haven't found any injuries on the girl or the baby. The father is here and they're safe. Mr. Brooks, I assume your wife, the mother of the child, is terribly worried waiting at the hospital. We'll escort you two and the baby back so you can reunite with her as soon as possible." Malcolm couldn't keep quiet any longer. The pieces weren't fitting together, and every instinct he had was screaming that something was very wrong. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his voice rising with frustration and concern. "I saw this girl ran out of the subway alone carrying a baby. She looked terrified. This isn't just a simple runaway." The police were taken aback, exchanging glances as they considered Malcolm's statement for a moment, noticing their reaction. Malcolm opened his mouth to protest further, but Martin interrupted him. "Hey, who do you think you are?" Martin snarled, his face reddening. The sudden shift in his demeanor was jarring. "You don't have the right to tell the police what they should or shouldn't do. Mind your position, clerk." The tension in the room was palpable. Margaret stepped between Malcolm and Martin, trying to diffuse the situation. "Malcolm, you need to calm down," she said firmly. "Don't cross the line," Officer Chen explained to Malcolm that they had confirmed Lena's identity. No further investigation was actually needed at this point. They would escort the family back to ensure everything was in order. Martin, still visibly angry, turned to Malcolm. "This is none of your business, Hespat. That's my child. I'm the father of both the baby and the girl. Nothing is wrong here." Malcolm's mind reeled at this information. He had considered the possibility of the baby being Lena's, but now, before he could process this new development, Martin was already ushering Lena and the baby out of the restroom. Officer Johnson patted Malcolm's shoulder. "Good job reaching out. To us," he said. "The situation is settled. You don't need to worry anymore." But as Malcolm watched Martin lead Lena away, the knot of unease in his stomach only grew tighter. Something about this situation felt deeply wrong, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was letting Lena down by not doing more. Malcolm and Margaret followed the officers as they exited the restroom. The heavy silence lingering in the air, the man paused at the door, casting one last seething glance at Malcolm before striding toward the station's exit. In that fleeting moment, Malcolm caught the dark fury in the man's eye sand, the way his lips formed silent profanities. He could make out two distinct words, each dripping with contempt in his hyper-alert state. Malcolm noticed how the man clutched his daughter and the baby, his grip too tight, almost possessive. The man's earlier explanation that the girl was simply too excited to leave the hospital with the newborn didn't sit right with him, but as Malcolm thought, About it, Heffeld, the excuse was too weak. No child would run away from the hospital unless there was some deeper, more sinister reason behind it. Malcolm. Margaret's voice cut through his thoughts, her tone a mixture of concern and exasperation. You need to let this go. The police have handled it. We should go back. But Malcolm couldn't shake the feeling that something was terrible. Wrong. He turned to his manager. His face itched with worry. Didn't you see how he grabbed her, how she flinched when he came? And that's not normal. Margaret sighed, running a hand through her graying hair. I know you mean well, but this isn't our business. We have a station to run, remember? There are still passengers from the concert who need assistance. Malcolm felt a surge of frustration. He knew he couldn't just walk away from his suspicions, but he also understood that for now there wasn't much he could do. He took a last glance over Holder, and now watched as the officer led the man and his daughter out of the station, feeling more defeated than prouder. Relieved as they walked back, Malcolm chose not to return to his station on the platform. Instead, he followed Margaret into the staff room and into the manager's office the moment they stepped inside. Margaret turned to him. Take a 10-minute breather, then get back to your shift. Malcolm let out a long breath, struggling to compose himself. I'm sorry for how I acted earlier, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Margaret's gaze softened her features. I understand how this situation has provoked you, especially after losing your wife and the stillborn a few years ago. Her words struck a painful chord, and Malcolm looked up, nodding as the weight of the past settled over him as he touched his vest, trying to steady himself against the painful memory. His fingers brushed against the birth record paper. Tucked inside, it suddenly dawned on him that, in the chaos, he had forgotten to hand it over to the family or Margaret, he said, his voice steadier now. Can I get the rest of the night off? It's emotionally challenging for me. I also need to return something, he said, suddenly reaching out to the birth record. Still tucked in his vest pocket, the girl, Lena, she left this in the sink. I should give it back. He pulled birth record, showing it to her. Margaret frowned, shaking her head. You can't just take your shift off there, RS deal. Plenty of passengers from the concert on Platform 1 who need you. We've already wasted enough time on this. Malcolm glanced at his watch, startled to realize that 30 minutes had passed since he'd left his post at that platform. He felt a pang of guilt, and the night was slipping away. Just leave the birth record here, on table, she suggested. I'll call an officer to collect it and return it to the family after I speak with the janitor. You need to get back to work, Malcolm reluctantly. Malcolm set the paper down on the table. Margaret gave him a reassuring nod before exiting the office to find the janitor. Once she was gone, a wave of defiance washed over him. He retrieved birth record, folded it carefully, and tucked it back into his vest, determined to keep it safe. His heart was pounding, but he knew he couldn't let this go. Malcolm left the office and made his way back to the platform, his mind churning with possibilities. The crowd had thinned somewhat, but there was still a steady stream of passengers waiting for trains. Resumed his position behind the yellow line, going through the motions of directing passengers and ensuring safety protocols were followed, thinking for a second that the concert must have been a really big one to have so many people still out at this hour. But then, as he worked, his thoughts kept drifting to Lena's frightened face, the way had clung to the baby, as if her life depended on it. And then there was Martin Brooks, with his rough handling and quick temper. Something didn't add up. The subway speakers crackled to life, the automated voice cutting through the noise. Attention passengers. The upcoming trains are the last trains of the night. Please ensure you board the correct train for your destination. Malcolm pushed thoughts of the girls out of his mind once more, shifted his focus to the digital display. The last train for Platform 1 was due any minute. Across the way on Platform 2, the display showed that the final train heading back towards the hospital would arrive in about 15 minutes. As the last train for Platform 1 pulled into the station with a screech off metal on metal, Malcolm redoubled his efforts. He guided and helped Passenger Santo the train as the doors closed and the train pulled away. Malcolm found himself alone in the now empty platform. He turned his attention to Platform 2, where his co-worker still stood vigilant. Malcolm raised a hand in greeting, intending to walk over and chat during this lull, but as he started to move, a familiar figure caught his eye. The homeless woman from earlier was sitting on the ground next to a vending machine. She seemed to be preparing to move, perhaps seeking a quieter spot now that the platform was emptying. Malcolm hesitated for a moment, decided to approach her. As he drew near, the woman's posture stiffened defensively. I Ain't done nothing wrong, she slurred, alcohol still heavy on her breath. What do you want? Malcolm held Oppie's hands in a plating gesture. It's not that, don't worry, he assured her. I actually wanted to ask about the young girl you saw in the restroom earlier. The woman grunted, eyeing him suspiciously. She seemed more sober than before, but the effects of alcohol were still evident. What do you want to know? She asked gruffly. Malcolm chose his words carefully. Can you tell me what happened when you were in the restroom? What did you see? The woman's bloodshot? I seemed to focus slightly as she recalled the event. I was just finished using the stall when she came in. She began pouring, was covered in sweat, looked scared out of her mind, crying too. She paused, her brow furrowing. She took the baby's blanket off, put it on the sink. Then she started begging me to help her. Malcolm listened intently, his heart aching for Lena. The woman continued, her voice lowering slightly. I could smell baby had peed. There was a urine stain on the girl's dress too, but I couldn't help her. Didn't want to get into trouble, you know, and I was too drunk to think straight anyway. Is there anything else you remember? Malcolm pressed gently. The woman was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Yeah, there was something else. When I asked her why she was wearing that hospital dress, she showed me an operation mark on her stomach. Malcolm felt his heart begin to rachi. He remembered Martin's words claiming the baby was his child, but if what this woman was saying was true. Malcolm felt sick as his mind conjured possible scenarios, each more horrifying than the last. The homeless woman shifted uncomfortably. That's enough talk, she muttered. You going to pay me for this information? Or what? Pulled from his disturbing thoughts. Malcolm reached into his pocket and pulled out a few crumpled dollar bills. This is all I have on me right now, he said apologetically. Holding out the money, the woman stared at the bills for a moment, then snatched them from his hand without a word of thanks. She stumbled to her feet and shuffled away, leaving Malcolm alone with his troubled thoughts. The speaker system crackled too. Life once more announcing the imminent arrival of the last train on platform. To Malcolm's head snapped up, his eyes fixed on the approaching train in that instant without considering the consequences. He made a decision as the train doors slid open. Malcolm sprinted across the platform and boarded the subway car. He caught a glimpse of his co-workers confused face hard him calling out, but Malcolm paid no heed. His mind was consumed with one thought. He needed to make sure Lena was safe. The car was nearly empty, with only a few late-night travelers occupying the seats as the doors closed and the train began to move. Malcolm's heart raced hetried to justify his actions to himself. He was just returning the birth record after all, but deep down, he knew the truth. He couldn't shake the feeling that Lena was in danger, and he had to do something about it. As the train gathered speed and pulled away from the station with a lurch, Malcolm's heart raced. What was he doing? He was abandoning his post, potentially risking his job, but the thought of Lena and the baby possibly in danger overrode all other concerns. The journey to the hospital station felt interminable. Malcolm's leg bounced nervously as he watched the dark tunnel walls flash by outside the windows. He rehearsed what he would say when he arrived at the hospital, how he would explain his presence, but deep down he knew he was acting on instinct rather than any concrete plan. Finally the train.